All right, welcome to MVP Chess. These are my favorite streams. Played in an over the board tournament last weekend. This past weekend on Saturday. 5 rounds, game 45, 5 second delay. Played a lot of strong players. This is just the best way to improve is to play in really strong tournaments and review your games. So I'm really looking forward to doing this with everyone. Hope you guys had a good weekend. All right. So, right into the fire. Round one, played a national master whose live rating was slightly under 2200. It was like 2197. But this player is really, really, really strong. I played him actually eight years ago, maybe, when he was kind of still pretty young, and I could tell at that time, I'm like, and I say this a lot on this channel, like, oh, this guy's gonna be, if I play a strong, junior player, they'll be a national master. I have a pretty good track record of getting this right because I remember saying the exact same thing about this player after I played him in that event once upon a time, and sure enough, it happened. So I opened with pawn to d4. My opponent played d5, c4, e6, queen's gambit declined. Already, I felt good about the opening. I've been running into some really, especially younger players, and I would think maybe he's like 17, 18, something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I've been running into a lot of really sharp prep in the Grunfeld and stuff. Queen's gambit decline. Once I went on the board, I was already feeling, pretty good about things. Just, in terms of opening prep and things like that. So he played knight to f6. I played the exchange variation, bishop g5, c6, totally normal, e3, and with my next move, my opponent really surprised me. He played bishop f5. Okay, chess.com is calling this the positional line. I know this as the short variation, and it's called the short variation because this was a line popularized by British Grandmaster and former World Championship contender Nigel Short. This is a variation that he kind of popularized, basically forcing a draw on command with black. Now, if black in the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation could play bishop f5 and get away with it with impunity, the Queen's Gambit decline would unquestionably. Now, there's already an argument that it is the best opening against the Queen's Gambit, but as far as I'm concerned, it would be a done deal. The debate would be over. But black can't get away with this without compromising their position. Okay. So the move to play here, and I was pretty familiar with this line, is queen to f3. Okay, now black's got a little bit of an alignment issue on the f-file. He needs to defend the bishop, and then I take twice here. So black has to accept this really kind of compromised pawn structure on the king side. As compensation, black does get the bishop pair, and he's managed to get this bishop to an active diagonal. The real weakness in black's position is this f5 square, okay? And that is what I spent the entire game trying to, and ultimately exploiting to great effect, is this f5 square. So We need to control that square with our knights and our bishop. Okay, so a natural developing move here could be knight to f3. Okay, but I chose knight ge2 with the idea of routing this knight to g3 and just eyeing up both of these squares, which is the best move according to the engine. And it's something I remember once upon a time studying a game that Magnus had in this line, and I'm pretty sure this is what he chose. I'm wondering if I could see in the Explorer. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Where is the local one? Oh, here it is, sorry. Did Magnus have a game in this line? Not exactly. Let me see if I can sort it by rating. No, I can't. Yeah, in any event, that's neither here nor there. Knight g2 with the idea of knight g3, clamping down in the f5 square. But I was following kind of my recollection of a game that Magnus played in this line once upon a time where he, had a really nice positional game by controlling the f5 square. So, a5 from black. Okay, I mean, maybe, in a lot of Queen's Gambit decline structures, we have a Carlsbad structure, so perhaps a5 is prophylaxis against some sort of minority attack. It might also be a way to, get the knight into these light squares, something like that. I don't know, the minority attack's really not on the cards anytime soon, just because I don't have the b1 square available for my rook. So I'm wondering if in this position it would have just been better for black to just continue with normal development like bishop d6 or something like that. But I'm sure a5 was part of his preparation. I routed the knight to g3. He continued pushing on the queen side, a4. Now I really can't let my opponent just keep pushing here and kind of undermine all these potentially weak, like for instance, if I centralize my king, maybe trying to prepare this after a3 b3. Yeah, I'm not so sure about this. Black can maybe look to just plop a knight down on b4. These light squares are pretty weak on c2 and d3. I'm not liking the look of that. So that's why I just kind of nipped this whole plan in the bud, a3. Stopping that, also preventing the knight from coming to b4, also preventing the bishop from maybe developing to b4 as well. Okay, so my opponent played bishop d6. I played king d2. And my opponent played f5. So I think he was kind of keyed into, this idea with the f5 square. Like, for instance, if you just can continue like this. I think this variation where white lands a piece on f5 while the pawn's still on f6 is definitely a good thing for white. So the way he played it, I played bishop d3, but this allows him to play f4. So I get my knight to f5, but my opponent is able to liquidate this potential long-term weakness, in terms of this doubled pawn. So I bring my knight to f5. He backs up the bishop. I take this moment to develop my rook with a not so subtle threat of knight takes d5, which forces him to play king d8. So already I think I'm definitely for choice here. Black's made, a couple pawn moves on the king side, a couple pawn moves with the f pawns. Also had to move the bishop twice and brought this king to this d8 square. So it's going to be a while before black can get the rooks connected. Meanwhile, I've already completed my development and I'm, you know, ready to go here, basically. So I just continued with my plan, knight e2. So I was trying to force some resolution with this pawn and maybe look to get my knight to the g3 square, so he captured. I recaptured with the f pawn. So I did have to take on a little bit of a pawn weakness in that I now have this backward pawn on e3, but it's not so easy to attack. You know, for instance, the knight does a really good job defending it. I've got the king here. I could quickly bring a rook to the e file if necessary. So, you know, it's a positional deficit in my position, but I don't think you could call this pawn objectively weak. So my opponent continues with development, and I just continued with my plan, knight g3. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was necessarily best, because it did kind of just walk into, you know, an h5 h4 idea. I do already pretty much have the f5 square locked down, so maybe I could consider rook hf1 in this position, or rook cf1, or even knight c3. You know, just kind of admitting, maybe my knight was fine on c3 where it was. So, not exactly sure I did the best thing with my queen's knight, because if you think about it, you know, this is kind of a weakness that's tying down this rook. Maybe I could even look to add pressure, you know, with the bishop. Try to provoke a move like b5, and then maybe try to take advantage of a weak c5 square. That's possible. But we have this. So I played rook cf1 in this position so that I could meet pawn to h4 with knight e2. Okay, and you know, not have to worry about my h pawn hanging in that position. So that's why I did that. He pushed on, and I just kept things closed. So during the game, now you don't have like a lot of time to think. I mean, it's game 45, but it goes by very quickly. You know, but I looked at this position for black, and I'm like, are these long-term weaknesses, or did I let black gain too much space on the king side and the queen side? The computer right now is reading triple zeros, so I think the computer can't even really come up with a determination there. But this is definitely kind of where the battle lines are drawn. You know, I'm going to try to attack these kind of weak points, and I guess black is going to try to make use of, you know, the space that he has, and, you know, maybe some of the weaknesses that I've had to leave behind to, you know, blockade these pawn advances. So knight to f6, really normal logical move here, but it does leave the knight undefended. So I was looking for some way to take advantage of this move, and what I came up with was knight h4. Okay, so threatening here, threatening the bishop, and also threatening the knight. So the best move in the position is apparently bishop e4. Okay, this is hard to see. And then maybe taking on f7 and playing a position like this where, you know, we have a pawn for the exchange, but I think a lot of our compensation, let's say the bishop comes out to save itself, we're going to be able to play knight c3 and pressure this pawn too. You know, our compensation is in terms of attacking these weak pawns. Okay, all of these have the potential to fall. And again, earlier in the game when we played rook c1 after bishop c7, forcing this king to d8, black's coordination's a little messed up too. So, but I mean, I did not play knight h4 with that line in mind. I mean, I just can't at this stage in my chess development weigh the positional factors, the positional compensation for a sacrifice like that in such a short period of time. So he jumped in with the knight instead, which was much more logical. And I just sidestepped because I knew that he's got a problem to deal with. This bishop is hanging. There's a weakness of the on the f7 square. If I exchange the knight on e3, this pawn could become weak. So this forced an error for my opponent. Okay, best move in this position would have been bishop to h5. When after, let's say, knight g1, maybe I'm looking to reroute the knight here, but this does get really messy. There's a sacrifice here. And once again, we have a position, let's take with the bishop to keep the knight defended, where we're giving up the exchange just for dynamic compensation with all of these kind of weaknesses in black's position and just the uncoordinated nature of black's position. Of course, this is a better version because we are getting the two knights. So, and I think white would be slightly better here. But that just wasn't on my radar, giving up the exchange like this. I was very dialed in, though, to g3 and the pressure that black had on it in combination with this h-pawn. That was something that I was very, very cognizant of. But king e7 is a mistake because I'm able to capture here, take on e4, and then just win this e-pawn outright. There's no way for black to defend it. Thanks in no small part to this king just kind of the entire game being in the way. So in this position, black played b5. I think he wanted to get the rooks into the game, and he didn't want the rook tied down to the defense of the a4 pawn. Of course, I just grab on e4 and centralize my king. So, I mean, I think objectively speaking right now, I basically have a winning position. It's an action game, though, against an incredibly strong player, so there's still a lot of chess to be played, but, this is a game that I should definitely win. Rook f5. Okay. I decided to capture here. I don't think that was best. I think what I need to do, maybe first and foremost, is actually sort out the coordination of my own rooks. So maybe, let's say, rook cf1. And, black doesn't have time to double here, because of the weakness of the c6 pawn. So after king d7, I'm in time to either play rook hf1 or maybe even rook c2, taking control over to the second rank and maybe looking to double, something like that. But I just decided to take, which was more of like a practical decision because, we were both kind of getting a little short on time. He was in more time trouble than me during this game, by quite a bit. I think my time advantage may have been in excess of 10 minutes or so, which is quite a lot at this time control. But I just decided to take here to close the F file, kind of create another weakness, and just look to attack these pawn weaknesses. So I played knight to f2, pressuring this pawn, king d6, and I just broke with e4. Engine likes rook f1 a little bit better, but it's warming up to e4. I just wanted to get this knight in the game, get my king active, and open up the position and start pushing my passed pawns. So he took. I took with the knight. The king dropped back. and then I played rook to f1. So I was, at this point in the game, feeling extremely confident. Playing very confidently, playing very quickly. Bishop b6, knight g5, very logical move, also the best move. Threatening rook f7, threatening to take this pawn. Great multi-purpose move. And he looks for counterplay on the d-pawn. So I knew I was going to play rook f4 here, but first I decided to give this kind of disruptive check. Rook f7, forcing the king back, and then and only then playing rook to f4. So much better than just playing rook f4 directly, because it's pushing the king to the back rank, was my logic there. And he played c6 in this position. So, you know, he's going to win this d-pawn, which is rather weak, but look what I'm able to win. I'm able to win this h3 pawn and trade this IQP. It was a passed pawn, but it was an IQP for two connected outside passed pawns. So I think that trade was really, really, really in my benefit. And then I just simply got the knight out of the way. Knight g5. Let's, you know, passed pawns are meant to be pushed. So I was getting the knight out of the way, the h-pawn. Again, this king has to move. This was a theme throughout the game. How much time black lost with this king. I would say at least 2 to 3 tempi. You know, you think back to the move king d8, forcing the king back to e8, now d7, just to get out of the way of the rook. I brought the knight here to apply pressure here. Now I'm threatening to win this pawn outright, and he brought the rook over. I think there may have been an error in my in this position. There may have been an error in my notation, but I don't think it would have changed the position very much. It's possible here that he actually moved the king. But long story short, I was weighing like whether or not I should be taking this pawn. And this was actually a subject that came up in the lesson yesterday that I gave, is about not improving your opponent's pieces. And I just felt like this pawn is giving my king actually really nice shelter. Okay? So I can freely push these pawns without being worried about harassing checks by the rook. It's also blunting, you know, key diagonal of this bishop. So I just said, forget about the d pawn, you know, just push the passed pawns. And that's what I did. And after king c8, I just kept pushing my majority, pushing my majority. He was very low on time now. You know, he was down to like a matter of seconds. So you see a move like king a6. Obviously, that's not a good move. My opponent knows it's not a good move, but he was literally just trying to put a move on the board so that he didn't lose. You know, I think after I grabbed that pawn on e4 and brought my king to d3, he kind of went into damage control mode and spent, you know, a lot of time trying to figure out how he was going to save the position and draw it. So, you know, he ended up using a lot of time there. But after g6, rook h6, I just brought the rook where it belongs, behind the passed pawn, getting ready to push this passed pawn. And in this position, my opponent resigned, knocked his king over, and we got the W. Boom. So, huge win in round one over a national master. I played a very, very accurate game. Now, I just analyzed it with game reviews, so it's not at an incredibly high depth, but accuracy was 95.6, so almost 96%. And during the game, I only made 4 inaccuracies. So no mistakes, no misses, certainly no blunders. You can't blunder against a player like this and expect to win. And, you know, he just made 2 mistakes. So it's, you know, a lot of times when the the top seeds in this tournament, the title players, go down, it's like a sharp position, and they just miss something tactically. But that wasn't the case in this game, and that's why I'm pretty proud of it. Was because I won a more positional, a more maneuvering game, where I was able to transition into a better end game and get these passed pawns and win this way. So I was definitely very proud of this game. And I was off to a great start in the tournament. So, can I pull up the next game? Yes, let's see. Okay. So, when you beat a national master in round 1 in a tournament, in a premier section of a tournament like this, you better believe your next game is going to be really, really hard. And of course it was. I was on board 1 with the black pieces against another national master. And this player, Kalpaka, who I've seen around, I've never played before, he's higher rated than Wilson. He was probably 2230, 2240 live rating, around there. So I knew this was going to be a tough game. So we had e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. We have an Italian. So we have a Gioco Pianissimo. Castles and I went for this line that I've been having success with, d5. And the one thing that, we talked about this game, my opponent and I talked about the game afterwards, and, we just both remarked that, d5 is a really good move, but it's also a really concrete move. And there are some subtle nuances and move orders and when you're supposed to play certain moves and when you're not, that are difficult to handle. But I've been having a lot of experience with it, so I was feeling optimistic. Rook e1, and then bishop g4, knight d2, knight b6. So as of now, I'm following my prep perfectly. And this is where the move h3 kind of threw me off. I was very surprised in this position that my opponent didn't play bishop b4. Or maybe b4. Like b4 and bishop. I just thought in this position that white was supposed to be trying to preserve this light squared bishop. So after h3, the move I undoubtedly, I think, should have made was bishop h5. Okay. And I'm never worried about something like this. Like, black cannot get away with taking this pawn. Bishop d6. And then you basically have like a quasi-martial attack on steroids. I mean, you've given up a pawn, but you just have a raging attack. And white's a little bit better developed than they are in the martial proper, but there's so many weaknesses to attack and ways to pry open black's position. This would be a lot of fun for me to play. So I should have backed the bishop off. Instead, I took the bishop. Sorry. I took the bishop on c4. Which is very forcing, because after knight takes c4, I'm forced to give up the bishop. And then after queen here, I kind of got a problem with the e5 pawn. Now here, I definitely should have played bishop d6. Just going for this position, nice and solid. Instead, I tried to keep the bishop on a more active post and played f6, which isn't a bad move. It's the engine's second choice after bishop d6, but the bishop's a target now. I do create some light square weaknesses, so. And now I'm in a little bit of trouble because after b4, I got kind of a problem with my bishop because b5's coming and this pawn can be captured by the queen. So bishop b6 is probably what I should have played. I dismissed it just because after a4, a6, for instance, I was kind of worried about this structure. I shouldn't have been. I think this would have been, it's not like the prettiest thing in the world. White definitely has a small edge, but I think it would have been better than what happened in the game. Okay, so instead, I brought the bishop to d6, okay, which obviously begs the question, Tom, why didn't you just bring the bishop to d6 immediately instead of weakening yourself with f6? I know. But the reason I brought the bishop to d6 now was to be able to meet b5 with knight e7, giving my knight a reasonable square to retreat to. So b5, knight e7, and then my opponent played queen takes b7. So my opponent won a pawn, but I wasn't panicking because there were so many lines in this d5 variation where black can give up a pawn usually and be totally fine and have totally sufficient compensation, just because in order to win this pawn, white normally has to weaken themselves quite a bit. So normally giving up the light squared bishop, maybe pushing b4, b5, so the d3 pawn will usually be weak in these lines, and white can be a little bit overextended on the queen side. So I played queen d7 here, and then my opponent captured, okay, pointing out that c takes d6 would be a huge mistake because of the pin. Now, I wanted to leave myself the opportunity of capturing towards the center with the pawn. So instead, I played the Zwischenzug. Of course, we're a Zwischenzug channel, not intermezzo or in-between move. I played rook fb8. Okay, kicking the king back to f3 and then recapturing with the c pawn. But this approach actually wasn't correct. The engine's saying rook fb8 is fine, but that in this position I should just be playing queen d6 anyway. I actually think these pawns would be better. This pawn would be better served on the c file, just because it might, I think, in the long term, offer a bit more defense to white pushing this pawn majority. I think that's the idea. I'm not exactly sure. But I played what I thought was the consistent move, which was taking towards the center. So I was trying to argue, yeah, you're up a pawn, but, maybe I've got some compensation in the form of kind of a massive center and lead in development and maybe some play against these weak pawns. But he played c4, so nipping d5 in the bud. I went ahead and played d5 anyway, which was probably a mistake. I should have started to sort out the coordination of my rooks. Okay, because I really got to get this rook into the game. I also need to improve my knight, so maybe a move like knight f5 could be good. Eyeballing some weak squares here in white's position. But I just struck back in the center. I thought this was kind of more thematic. a4, and then I just played rook c8, trying to put pressure here. But my opponent just calmly played bishop a3. Now, bishop e3 is also good too. But just pointing out that, you can't take on c4 because your rook's hanging. So, I almost wish in this position, now the engine agrees with me, but I'm just wondering if it would have been better to either bring this rook to e8 or d8 and then bring the a rook to c8. That was kind of my positional issue in this game, was sorting out these rooks. Yeah, the pawn structure sucks for sure. Rook c8, bishop a3, and I wanted to keep the game as complicated as I could. Knight to f5. All right, I'm not allowing the exchange of these knights. And I saw that if white tries to take here, I think this is actually very good for, not very good for black, but I'm making some progress. That this pawn could be potentially weak, and I am ready to kind of jump into the c2 square with the knight. But instead, he just centralized his rook, also taking control over, these key squares on the c file, c2 in particular. So of course I brought the knight in, knight d4, gaining time on the queen, and my opponent offered a queen exchange. Now, apparently the best move for me in this position would have been to exchange queens. Takes, and then maybe look to play e4. Takes, and then capturing on d4 here. So kind of, on c4 rather. So that was a nice idea that I missed. It's kind of like imbalancing the pawn structure such that, white has a majority over here, but I'm able to change it in such a way where now it's a 2v2 and the 4-on-3 is on the king side. That would be much better for me, because I think long term that would offer me much better drawing chances, especially envision a rook and pawn ending where white has 4v3 on the king side. That's going to be a draw. So that would have been a nice way to change the pawn structure in my favor. But I missed that. I missed that idea. That's what you need to see in order to play queen g4. But, again, this is an action tournament, and you have to make practical decisions and make them quickly. So I just said, look, I'm down a pawn, but more importantly, I'm basically lost on the queen side. I need to get active play going and try to muddy the waters and complicate the position. So that's why I played f5 here. Okay, is it a move I want to play? No, of course not. It kind of weakens my king position further, and it's definitely a move I don't want to play, but I felt like it was one that I had to make just to complicate the game and try to see if I could claw back that way. So he backed the queen off. I took on c4, and then straightened out my rooks. Okay, this pawn is on prise, so I brought my rook over to the e file to protect it. Rook e8. Again, this might not be computer approved, but I also thought it was an important move to make. Like, the engine is suggesting e4 here. But I was really concerned in this position about, like, the simple queen e7, where I'm forced to exchange queens. Like, I don't want a queen exchange. This guy is going to absolutely crush me on the queen side with this 3v1. So that was kind of the multi-purpose move logic behind rook e8. Defend this pawn, but also prevent this queen from coming in and forcing some sort of exchange. He played c5, of course, so here comes the majority. I lifted a rook e6. Maybe I can... there were some lines that I was calculating depending on how white responded, where, who knows, maybe the queen could be trapped and I could end the game by perpetual attack on the queen by some repetition, who knows. But I need to do something active like this. Like, I need to go on some attack and try to see counterplay this way. He played c6 and I played queen d5, centralizing the queen. And my opponent played rook c5. Now, if I move the queen in this position, I could just basically go ahead and resign. Because my queen is beaten back or is kind of brought into no man's land here on the queen side. Black just has too much active play on the king side and with this passed pawn. So I needed to look for something really active. So I found what I thought was... Oh yeah, point system's back. So I found what I thought was the only active plan in the position. I played knight to f3, trying to open up the king. Okay, taking advantage of this rook coming into g6, the queen capturing on f3, and also this loose bishop on a3. But my opponent, especially because of the weak the weakness this F pawn left behind had it all covered. I played rook g6. Now he's got a very accurate move that he has to make here, because king h1 loses, king f1 draws, and of course the only other way to block this with the queen would also lose. So white has only one move here, which my opponent found, but this is what you want to do. Like, this gave me a chance. Whereas if I had exchanged queens and just allowed my opponent to push this massive pawn majority, I would have had no chance. So it's a rapid game. Anything could happen. But of course my opponent found the correct move, king h2. I took on f3, threatening mate in 1. Again, white has only one move in this position. Of course he found it, rook g1. But still, that's two moves in a row where I at least forced my opponent to find an only move in the position to win. What else can you really hope for? I captured, and after king takes g1, I took on a3. So material balance has actually been restored, and I'm on this rook, which is really nice. But of course there are two problems with this position. One is that this 3-on-1 majority is just really, really strong. White's able to play this really nice consolidating move, queen c4 check. Actually, when my opponent played it, I didn't even realize it was check. I was looking for an active move with my queen for like a couple seconds before realizing, oh god, I'm in check. So king f8 is the only move. You can't go in the corner. The pawn's push. I have to put the rook here. The queen comes in. Of course, I have to take this rook. There's nothing else to do. And in this position, I resign because once I move the king, my opponent's going to move the queen and just push the pawn. Now, you'd be surprised. Now, my opponent played a perfect game. Literally a perfect game. He did not make a single inaccuracy. His accuracy was over 96%. Game review is saying he made 0 inaccuracies. I made 2 mistakes this game. Okay, and if you want to review them quickly, the first one is how I dealt with this bishop. Okay, we talked about bishop b6 being much better here. Accepting the ugly structure, right, like this. Maybe even take with the a pawn here, but being totally in the game. I did not appreciate how important this b7 pawn was, and how detrimental it was going to be to my position to lose it. Partly because in these lines, black is routinely giving up a pawn for great compensation. So that fact and all the studying I've done in these lines kind of gave me some bias there, which ended up being really wrong. The other mistake that I made, if we go back, why can't I see it? So here's mistake 1. And my only other mistake in the game was f5, which I don't consider to be a mistake. I understand why Game Reviews is saying it's a mistake. Because I had to see this. Okay, fine. You can say it's a mistake that I didn't see this way to alter the pawn structure in my favor. But I can't allow these queens to be exchanged. So I thought actually f5 in this move was one of my best. It was pretty much my best practical try. And it led me to a position where my opponent had to find 2 only moves to win the game. So I really can't ask for much more than that from this position. So lost that game. My opponent played really well. It was really that one little hiccup in the opening that cost me. And he said that after the game, and I totally agree with his assessment, and so does the engine, that you made all of the correct practical moves after that kind of opening inaccuracy mistake. All the practical tries. Like he totally agreed with my decision to play f5 and knight f3, queen d5, rook e6, sacrifice, all of that stuff. Like, what else can you do? So I was at least happy with this game, that I was able to generate some counterplay in the end and not go down hard. Okay, this game was mental game. Round 3, I was playing a player rated 2100, I think. Somebody I've never played before, who I think is kind of fairly new to our chess scene, but has been doing really well in a lot of events. So I had the white pieces here. Again, we have another Queen's Gambit. I actually got a Queen's Gambit with all of my white games this tournament, which was interesting. Knight f6, pawn to e3. That's what so many players are playing the semi-Slav these days. I'm getting this so often. And, it's what I like to play too. Although I play a hybrid that's kind of like mainly semi-Slav, but also with elements of the QGD and also the classical Slav. But it's just such a good opening. Knight f3, knight bd7, bishop e2. My opponent took here, so I'm able to play a4 since the bishop's not hanging. And my opponent played knight b6 here. I'm not sure that was good. Very provocative move. I could have played a5 directly, but instead I decided to play knight e5 so that I can meet bishop d6 with a5 and then knight takes c4. And then we have bishop c7. So I'm definitely better here. The engine's giving me a pretty decent edge here. About a little less than a pawn. About 0.92. But I actually had a kind of a difficult time in this position, kind of sorting out and coordinating my pieces. Like, the one annoying thing about this knight on d5 was that, a pretty logical plan for me, after getting myself castled, so let's just put that on the board, is getting this bishop to the a3 square. Okay, you envision this bishop coming to a3, and then look at all the pressure I have on these weak dark squares. But the problem with that is the knight's hanging if I play b3. And also, after what I played in the game, which was bishop d3, okay, computer approved move, maybe bishop f3 or queen c2 would have been better here. But I went with bishop d3, and now, and I totally understand why the computer's saying this, now queen c2 to protect this knight in order to advance b3 and bring the bishop out to here just doesn't work on account of knight b4. So I just had a hard time kind of sorting out my pieces in this game and getting the coordination that I really wanted. So he played queen e7. Okay. I could have played e4 directly, but I just played rook e1, trying to put some more power behind the move and also just putting the rook behind the queen. My opponent played rook d8. And then, in this position, I went for it. In hindsight, I definitely should have played e4 the move before, but e4 here works, but it gets crazy. It gets absolutely crazy. So my idea was to meet the move knight b4. This is the move that my opponent has to play. Well, it doesn't have to play. They could take on c3, but I think that would be a colossal mistake, giving me this massive center. My opponent is way too strong to play a move like that. He played knight b4 as expected, and my plan was to meet this move with e5. Okay, pointing out that in this position, knight takes d3, loses to e takes f6. So, nice counterattack. So I was kind of hoping in this position that maybe my opponent would play knight e8 or knight fd5, for instance, in which case I could bring the bishop back to b1 or f1, maybe even a sort of Greek gift sacrifice would work here. I think it might. But instead he found the best move in the position. It was a move that I really underestimated. Really, frankly, didn't even consider that closely, which I should have, was rook d4. I just didn't think he had kind of a forcing move like this, just because I was going to be on the queen with gain of time the next move. But apparently this is still good for me, but I have to be very accurate about how I play. So I played the best move in the position, which is bishop takes h7 check. Okay, the knight has to take. And then I took on d4. The problem with this... Now, if this bishop were already developed, I would basically be winning. Because any other move... Yeah. Unfortunately, after knight c2, I am going down some material here. But I saw this idea, of course, and prepared to meet it with the move queen g4. And to meet knight takes a1 with bishop h6. Okay, threatening checkmate here, and then also the knight on a1. But the idea that I really missed that works really well is f5. Okay, that's a nice move. We're taking en passant, doesn't work. My queen's under attack, and now this queen is defending this pawn laterally. So, ruh-roh, I'm in some trouble. But I have a lot, I think, of dynamic compensation, just in terms of a lead in development and, pretty active pieces and a weak position of the king. Instead of queen g4 in this position, a really awesome idea would be to play queen d1, okay, and after knight takes a1, playing rook to e3. Okay, and you're looking to actually coordinate an attack on the h-file. So here I'm actually better. After knight b3, that's the computer's top move, is just to play knight b3, giving up this piece, just to deflect this queen away from being able to come to the king side really quickly. Like if you play a move like b3 here, b5, you can just ignore it. And just to give you an example, in this position, queen h5 is winning. The game is over. So that's really what I needed to look for in this position, was more of making better use of the open h-file and the weaknesses that bishop takes h7 created, and less so on just trying to win back this knight. But, truth be told, time twister, truth be told, what I really missed was this move f5. So, I don't really know if my opponent saw this whole line after he played rook d4. I think he needed to, in order to get full credit, so to speak. But I just think rook d4 was the best move for a number of reasons. It was also the most practical move, because I think he saw if I came back to e8 or if he came back to e8 or to d5, that I would get a really, really strong initiative. So I got to keep the queens on the board. He played knight c2. I moved the rook over. Knight b4, knight d6. So look, I'm gaining. I am down a piece right now, but look at black's development. Okay, and look how active my pieces are. I'm in great attacking position. My knight is fantastic. My rook's fantastic. My queen and bishop are fantastic, and my king's safe. So the computer's not giving me full compensation here, but it is giving me some compensation. Yeah, absolutely. So Ben just said, lesson here is if you force your opponent to make a good move, he just might. And that is so true, because you're calculating all these variations in your head, right? And there's a lot to keep track of. But once you put it on the board and it becomes concrete, and your opponent has to find an only move to stay in the game, especially at this rate, especially somebody rated 2100, they're going to find it. So I made the game much more concrete, and I just miscalculated. You know, I just didn't see this f5 idea, and it kind of cost me an otherwise really good position out of the opening. But the game's not over. Bishop takes d6. I took with the rook, which was best. I thought for a second about taking with the pawn, but you know, pointing out that obviously black can't take this pawn because it's mate. But you know, queen f6, queen d7, queen f7, they're all fine. Black's just gonna blockade this pawn, and it's actually kind of getting in my way. So I definitely think it was best to take with the rook. Computer supports me. Didn't really know what to do here. There was a couple lines I was looking at, was just capturing twice here and just getting back some material. King g8, rook b7. So now I'm only down 1 point of material. My opponent does have the knight though. I just wasn't really sure about this position. I just thought my best practical chance, especially in this time format, was to keep pieces on the board and keep things more complicated. So, you know, maybe if my opponent had played a Grunfeld, you know, if I was playing like a Grunfeld player or like a King's Indian player, okay, maybe I would have considered that a little bit more, just because... Now, it's not an entirely safe assumption to make, but players that are playing sharp openings like that are generally more tactical and attacking in nature and may not be as strong in the endgame as somebody who plays a Slav. I think that's a fair conclusion to make, but I just wanted to keep pieces on the board. So I decided to reroute this bishop and try to bring it to the c5 square and maybe try to kind of break this blockade that black has set up on the dark squares and on the d file. So I went with that. He played b6 to stop my idea, and then I said, okay, time for some caveman chess. So I played the computer approved move h4. He played rook b8, and I just full steam ahead, h5. And after bishop e8, I should have just played h6 here. That would have been the way to go. Instead, I played knight e2. Thinking, well, you know, if he plays bishop takes h5, then I get knight d4 in. I got a lot of pressure over here. Maybe the open h file is good for me. He didn't take, though. He decided to centralize his knight. I kept the bishop on, of course. This is my best minor piece, I think, just with all of these dark square weaknesses. My opponent played rook d8, challenging my rook, and I just pushed on, h6. He tried to keep things closed, and I brought my knight in, and we had an exchange here. And this is where notation stopped. So, for those of you who don't play action tournaments, or maybe you don't play OTB in general, this time control, when you have just a 5-second delay, you have no 30-second increment or anything like that. Once one of your opponents gets below 5 minutes, both players are permitted to stop notation. Now, stopping notation is not something I like to do, and I basically know how the game went, but out of respect for my opponent and just for the sake of accuracy, I'm not gonna like play it out just in case there's something I misremembered. But long story short, this game ended in a draw by perpetual. I was able to really make use of all of these dark square weaknesses to, like, for instance, after this move and the queen move, I think to f7. I think the move that I played in this position was like pawn to d7. And I was able to infiltrate with my queen. I eventually brought my bishop to the long diagonal. I won back my piece. I got basically a winning position. We both had seconds left on our clock, and my opponent found a perpetual idea, which I could have tried to avoid, but it looked a little unclear to me. I'm sure it was winning, and I just kind of basically repeated the position and agreed to the draw. So I think that was a fair result because he was much better. I was much better. It was just kind of a crazy semi-soft game. But I was proud of my way, even though I miscalculated a little bit. I didn't give up. I kept the position as complicated as I could. I created great counterplay and attacking chances, and eventually ended up in a better position and saved the half point. So that was a great result, I thought. And just a really fun game to play. Like a really fun game to play. So that was round 3. In round 4, I was actually pared down a little bit. But this player, he's kind of like a younger up-and-coming player whose rating is very nebulous. You know, he's gained like 300 points in, you know, a matter of months. So who knows where this guy really is. This was the least interesting game of the tournament by far. So I'm going to go through this one a little bit quickly. My opponent went for this Trompowsky idea, and you know, I probably should have played something like c5 or something like this, but I just kind of kept things solid. I went for more of like, I was going for kind of like a reversed London type deal. I get my bishop outside the pawn chain, and this is just a trend I'm noticing with young players, which is fine. It's their right and everything. But they get into a game against a stronger player with white, and their goal is basically to exchange pieces and kill the game and try to draw. And you know, if you have that mindset combined with just solid chess ability, which this player clearly has, it's very hard to create any winning chances for yourself without, you know, compromising your position just for the sake of creating some sort of imbalance in counterplay. So my opponent took on f6. I captured with the bishop just to keep the e5 square under control. He played e4. I played queen b6. So I was hoping in this position that my opponent would go for like e5. I would play bishop e7, and I would have like the world's best French defense. Okay, it's a tempo down, but the light squared bishops have been traded. This knight is on c3 when this pawn should really be on c3. I'm going to be able to get c5 in and get a really good game. But he didn't bite on that. He played a3, pointing out that queen b2 would now be losing. Of course, I didn't take on b2. So I just played a5 here. Just kind of clamping down on the queen side. I didn't know if his intention was to try to play b4 eventually. Probably not, but a5 seemed like a good move to me. And here he just took. So I played the best move in the position, which is e takes d5. I could take this way to create more of an imbalanced pawn structure to try to create winning chances, but like I'm not going to do that and allow my opponent to play a4 and clamp down on the b5 square. Like I just refuse. I know some players do this, but I just refuse to compromise and not make the objectively best moves in the decision to try to just create winning chances out of nothing. I personally just can't play that way. You know, maybe if I wasn't a coach, I would be able to, but I just try to implore the skill of my students about finding the best move in the position and playing the board and not playing the opponent, and it's just very hard for me to separate myself from that and play something that's unsound and inherently risky. So unfortunately, you know, we've traded off 2 sets of minor pieces. We have a completely symmetrical pawn structure. There's only one open file, which means all the heavy pieces are probably going to be exchanged. So he just plays b3. Okay, now I've got nothing to attack on the queen side. I challenge the open file. He brings his queen in. I bring my queen to c7. He clamps down on the queen side. I slightly improve my queen. He just basically shuffles his queen around, so I bring my queen into the danger zone. I was just trying to provoke some weaknesses here, which I did a little bit. Okay. And then this was kind of my one idea to try to imbalance the position a little bit and play for a win. But it's based on really solid, I think, concepts. He can take here, which he did, giving me a backward pawn. But this is only temporary. You know, I calculated after rook e8, I'm going to be able to push e5 through. So that will create dueling pawn majorities, 4v3 for me, 3v2 for him. I'll have an open f-file. And my opponent has a slightly weak king, so do I. But I thought maybe from this position I'd be able to outplay him. Knight e2, e5, pawn to g4. Now I could have played e4 here, and I was looking at this, but I just didn't totally buy this position for me. I am down a pawn, but obviously I'll be able to win him back eventually, but it just wasn't really my cup of tea. I really wanted to keep pieces on the board and try to attack this lower rated player than me. So after g4, I just brought my queen back to f7. You know, my queen was a little exposed over on the king side. She's done her job. She provoked g3, h3, and g4. So I said, okay, let's just bring her home. And after takes, you know, we have some exchanges here. But then this gave me the opportunity to, you know, go into a knight versus bishop endgame where I have a queenside pawn majority. And after I played this move, time twister, do you notice what I'm doing here? I'm coordinating my queen and my bishop for an attack. I thought maybe I could get some play in the dark squares. So after knight f5, boom, I play queen e5, threatening to come in here and really cause trouble. But my opponent found a pretty clever defense, queen e3. Okay, I don't really want to exchange queens here, because that's just going to be, it's just going to be a draw. And I also can't really afford to go venturing too far over here. Actually, the best move in the position would be for me to come back. Like if I just keep checking him, I could easily lose this game. In fact, black is losing. So I got to be careful in my back rank. So I played g6 to try to stir things up. I thought maybe he would take here and we could get a position like this, where I don't know, maybe on a good day my king can get in and abuse these weak and dark squares and I can win. But my opponent found a good response here, queen g4. And in this position, I was getting a little concerned about my back rank. And, you know, I'm thinking about the 5th round. I'm thinking about preserving energy. I do have some dark square weaknesses of my own. So in this position, I just decided to take the perpetual. We both played a very accurate game, over 96%. I made one inaccuracy, as did he, basically. Chess.com is calling it a nice even game. Basically, it was zeros all across the board. So what can you do? I mean, I think I tried at one point to imbalance the position in a favorable way, but I'm not going to play dumb and try to ruin my position just to make things messy with the, you know, chance I might be able to win. I'm just not doing it. So had to accept a draw in that position. And let's take a look at the last game. Do I have it here? Yes. So this was a valuable learning opportunity for me, because I'll just go ahead and say, like, right off the bat, I lost this game. And after playing in that online tournament the night before and playing 4 rounds, I'd been playing since 10 o'clock in the morning, okay? This round started at 6:30 at night. I was exhausted. I was unable to, my brain stopped working. I was trying to calculate stuff. I told this to my opponent afterwards. I was trying to calculate stuff and nothing was happening. Literally nothing was happening. I was just at the point of, because that online tournament I played was 5 rounds. I was playing that from 8 till about midnight. And then I turned around and played this. That's a lot of chess. And especially having played 2 National Masters and then the 2100 in the first 3 rounds, I was just spent. And there were times during the last game where and that was another reason I kind of took that perpetual, where I was catching my miscalculations, but I wasn't seeing the board clearly. And I think if I'll definitely play in this event in the future. I think I'm going to take at least 1 bye and just make it a 4-round tournament, because it's just too much for me. This is the second time I've played this in this tournament, and I've lost the 5th round. But I'll show you the game. So we had an exchange QGD, which I was really happy about. So just really normal stuff. Castles. I was feeling great about this. Bishop f5. Okay, I played knight e5. He challenged me. And then I had a decision to make. Knight e5, by the way, was the best move in the position. The engine's saying that I should either play f3 here and go in for something like this, which is a little mental. Kind of hard to calculate. Okay. Or just simply take the knight on d7. I didn't want to do either of those things, okay? But because I wasn't calculating anything concretely here, I was just thinking I was just using chess knowledge. I was like, well, in d-pawn openings, you have a knight on e5. Very often, if you prop it up with f4, it's very difficult for your opponent to handle, so that's what I played. But I didn't calculate anything. And after f6, this knight really just needs to go back to f3. And all I've done is just given myself a long-term weakness on e3. Okay? It's hard for chess players to admit that, especially at where I was mentally. So I just ended up taking. So I definitely should have just taken the knight in this position, okay, and just gone for some sort of minority attack or something like that, and played without any risk. Oops. What did I just do there? But instead, I made just a detrimental move to my position. So I kind of prophylactically defend this pawn, and my opponent made a really great move. Knight d6. That's a fantastic move. He wants these light square bishops traded off. He wants to pressure the pawn on e3. That was definitely the way to go. I eventually went for this minority attack. It was the only thing I could think of doing in the position, because I was really banking on some attack on the light squares after f6. But he's got that locked down, and this bishop on f5 is just completely nipping all of that in the bud. And then he just starts doubling. These aren't hard moves to find for black. b4, a6. Okay, I pushed on. Takes. And what I definitely should have done here was just started hunkering down and just passively defending this pawn. And it's actually pretty hard for white to make any progress in this position. But instead, I looked for active counterplay, realizing that this would drop a pawn, but I thought, well, my rook's getting to the a file, maybe I can get some attack on the king going. But again, I wasn't calculating anything. I was just looking at a potentially weak king position in combination with a rook landing on the back rank. Maybe I could drum up some counterplay, but it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So I had to take on f5. I mean, there was like no way around it. After king h7, I'm just completely lost here. And I basically just kind of shuffled the pieces around. Try to create some like maybe tricky tactical ideas, but this threat of double check, like just this primitive rook e1 is just very difficult to meet. So I put my king in the corner, and in this position I just resigned, and I just kind of went down hard. My opponent played, this was the most accurate play that I faced in the tournament, 97%, no inaccuracies. He played a perfect game. Obviously we're playing over the board, so there's no like, there's nothing sus about it. He's just a good player, and I just gave him a very comfortable, easy position to play where he had very clear weaknesses to attack, and I just basically wasn't able to calculate. So, you know, we had a nice chat after the game. He was a very nice guy, and, you know, I just said, you know, I was looking forward to playing you, and I just didn't give you really a game. So, you know, hopefully I get to play him sometime in the future, because I think we'd probably be pretty evenly matched just in terms of rating and everything. So I finished the tournament on 2 out of 5, but it's very misleading because my first game was an absolute fantastic win against the National Master. The second round, I played a pretty good game, but just got outplayed in the opening by a National Master. I drew, was basically in a winning position against a 2100, was forced to take a draw in round 4 because my opponent, you know, just played super solid, exchanged all the pieces, and kind of killed the game. And then this round was just, you know, what can you do? So I'm really proud of the way I played, even though my score doesn't really reflect it. I think I ended up gaining, like, I think my tournament performance was about 1970 or something like that. So it's pretty good. It could have been a lot better. But I just take away from this tournament a feeling of kind of confidence and optimism. I'm definitely moving in the right direction. Like, being able to outplay a National Master like that in the first game in a very positional manner and convert it convincingly is a really good sign. Also, just the fact that I was competitive in the other games against the Master in the 2100. I'm getting there. I'm on the right trajectory for sure. So hopefully, you know, in my next several tournaments, I'll have kind of the breakthrough performance that I feel like I'm on the verge of having. But we shall see. So that'll do it. I hope you enjoyed the recap today. Big shout out to everyone who joined. By the way, don't forget, if you're watching, first of all, thanks. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to shoot us a follow. Become a member of Team MVP. We're trying to get up to this 300 goal. It's proven to be pretty challenging for some reason. Yeah, maybe after the summer's over, we'll get past this little lull that we're having. But in any event, that's not why I do it. But still, I'm a chess player. Metrics are important to me. So I'm looking at this number and I'm like, damn it, I want it to go up. Anyway, thanks so much for Ben and DJ and Time Twister for your chats today. Thanks for your encouragement. Thanks for watching this stream. It's not historically as popular as like when I play and everything, but you know, for me, this is the most important streams that I do. I think it really helps me analyze my games better than I would do on my own. So, thanks for checking it out. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Should be back tomorrow with the usual schedule. Hope to see you then. Take it easy. Bye.